Thank you, everyone. I am under strict instructions to keep it short. And like most people that have been teachers in their time, that's not an easy task. But I'll try. First of all, I do want to talk about the terms of reference for the research project. As you can see from the screen, the terms of reference were laid out very, very clearly by the diocese and were supported by the bishop. The terms of reference were not totally met in the conduct of the research. One area that we did not cover, that we would have liked to have covered in a lot more detail, was to look at the actual beliefs and practices of the students in our schools. And we didn't really get up to that. It was a very, very difficult task. And I'm hoping that in the near future we might be able to do that. In fact, the leaders of your diocese don't know it, but we've actually put together a bit of a project funded by the university to try and do that in consultation with the diocese. So they're the terms of reference, and you can read them, and I'm not going to go through them because I really am very, very conscious of the time. So here we go. I do want to stress that the report does need to be read in its entirety. And when you look at the number of pages across 4 volumes, none of you will enjoy the thought of that. But in order to appreciate the findings of the research, the whole report does need to be read. The executive summary is just that, it's a summary, but the nuances, the important things that do come through from the research, and it was a pretty big piece of research, do need to be captured by reading the whole report. So I do want to stress that because I know it's, not many of us in this room will do that, but I've said what I need to say. The literature review of the curriculum was conducted a little bit separately to the rest of the research. It did guide the research, but there was a different concentration of researchers that conducted the literature review, and that needs to be stressed as well. So it stands alone. It's an authoritative document. It does present a great deal of information, and it brings together an enormous amount of information that impacts religious education as is taught in our schools. But Jared is going to talk about that after I've finished my time here, so I'm going to leave that entirely up to him. The one thing that I do want to stress is that the last dot point that's on that slide, and that is Parramatta Diocese is doing something right. Parramatta Diocese is doing something that other dioceses don't seem to be doing as well. And that is the kids in our schools, the teachers that teach them, and those that are responsible for the administration of the schools have actually produced an environment where religious education is well thought of by the community in general, and where kids do try to follow the teachings of Jesus. They do it within the context of how they see the world, but nevertheless they do try. And that really is something that needs to be said and stressed, because you people standing or sitting before me are really doing something right, and something that others are not doing. You're to be congratulated for it, and I really do take my hat off to you. I'll now move on to the next slide. The purpose of this slide is simply to show where the data was collected. As you can see, there were 30 priests who contributed to the data. Not 1 or 2, not 10, but 30. 58 principals, 73 RECs, 1,389 teachers, 532 parents, 40 alumni, and I will just make a comment about the alumni. Most of the alumni that contributed to the data were fairly young, so they were recent graduates of schools. It was a biased sample, and that needs to be stated up front. The rest weren't, but that particular group were. And here we have the real figures: 3,610 Year 9 and 11 students, 3,285 Year 5 and 6 students. So this research and the findings that will come from it are really well informed by a very, very broad basis across the diocese. I'm going to divide the rest of this talk into kind of 3 sections. And the first section is to talk about the findings from the report, of which there were 11, that were expected. It is important to talk about this in the context of any research that's conducted by anyone, even if it's number crunching. And this certainly was not number crunching, it was a combination. But any research is impacted by those who conduct that research. We come at this with expectations, even though we try to deny them, we try to push them away, we try to do all sorts of things to dissociate ourselves and conduct our research as detached as possible. But we all know it's not totally possible to do that. Part of me and part of everyone else who was on the team is in the interpretation of the data. So, with that said, I have no hesitation in acknowledging it by saying that there were certain findings that were expected. Not just my expectations, but the expectations of most of those involved. And the first one, in order to get the material on the slides, I've just abbreviated it, but I'll read out the entire finding. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is, and this was expected, a deep personal relationship with Christ is to be encouraged in religious education teachers and coordinators, as authenticity is crucial to the effective delivery of religious education curriculum. Resources need to be prioritised to enable this, beginning with the proclamation of the, and I have difficulty pronouncing this word, charisma. I hope I got it right. I did practice. I got it, tick. And most of you sitting here will say, well, yep, that was expected. So it's not just my expectation. It's your expectation as well. It was expected. And it did come through in all of the data, in all of its glory. And it really was glorious. The second one, professional learning for all staff should be a systematic program that makes explicit the contribution of each member of staff to the mission of Catholic schooling. Resources, including time for professional development and spiritual formation, need to be prioritised to enable this. That was expected. It means that there is a responsibility of those responsible for the purse strings to open them up a bit and provide the necessary professional learning, professional development that hopefully produces professional learning for all of us in this room, for all of us. And money has been tight in recent years, but this really should be a priority. We all know the world moves on, like there is nothing that's constant other than change. And for those of us that have been teaching for a long time, even those of us that have been teaching for a short time, things have changed. We need to keep abreast of changes, differences of opinion, even the nature of the students we teach. This is all part of our professional learning. Another part that is important as far as professional learning is concerned is to get that nexus between pedagogy, how to teach religious education, and what actually occurs in the classroom right. We can't hope to do that without learning how to do it in a way which connects with the kids that we're teaching. This is a bit of an aside, and it's a personal view, but I think it's pretty well substantiated. I actually do believe that religious education is kind of standalone when it comes to pedagogy. It's not like maths, it's not like English, it's not like any other subject that we teach in schools, and yet I would imagine most of us that engage in teaching any form of religious education draw on those same pedagogies. And I would argue that that could be seen to be problematic. I truly believe that religious education brings with it its own demand for separate, different, more focused and tangible pedagogies that relate specifically to religious education. It's what we're all about. It's what religious education in a Catholic school is all about. It is number one, it is different, and therefore it really does demand its own pedagogies. Just like ICT. 20 years ago, computers were entering our classrooms, and we engaged in teaching computers. You know, we went off to separate classrooms and we learnt and our kids were taught how to use a computer. And then when we went through the process of integrating them into the normal practices that occur across the curriculum. And in so doing, we began to develop pedagogies specific for teaching the technology associated with computer communication skills. Religious education demands that same sort of nuanced movement. The next one. The religious education curriculum should cater for diverse learning needs of students, irrespective of religious affiliation. In this way, religious education will be both evangelistic and, well, I was going to say catechetical, but I'm not sure whether that's the correct word, but we'll stick with that. Again, it is an expectation. But if I can put a little bit of colour on that, the kids, the students that we actually surveyed, spoke in volumes about the diversity of their fellow classmates. In the survey, as some of you will know, there were places for long or extended answers. I don't mind telling you that when we normally conduct such research, we kind of gloss over that, and it's an afterthought at the end because not many people write very much about this. When it comes to those extended answers, kids in particular don't engage with them very much. Didn't happen with this research. Didn't happen at all. The kids engaged. It became a huge task to analyse what people said in the extended answers. And it blew out the time frame like you wouldn't believe. It also blew out the budget too. But nevertheless, there was a great deal said by kids. And the kids did say that they appreciated the special needs that they, as a member of a diverse community, received from the school, particularly in the area of religious education. So again, the diocese is really doing something right there. They are respecting, honouring and catering for that diversity of students that we teach. And it needs to be acknowledged. And it was expected because we expected no less from teachers in the Parramatta Diocese. Sorry, I went the wrong way. The fourth one, a collaboration of genuine substance between the school and parish should be developed. The parish priest necessarily plays an indispensable role that must be emphasised and broadened. The vocation of priests places them at the heart of religious education. That was expected, but it's probably the one that I'm going to spend most time on. It was expected, but there was a diversity of responses. In fact, it was felt, it came through very, very clearly in the data that there was a diversity of view there as to just how central the priest was. No denying the priest should be absolutely and totally central to religious education in any school. But there was a huge diversity of views about how, what time was available, what resources were put at the disposal of priests to facilitate this. And it became one of the tensions in looking at the research and trying to understand the research findings. The whole idea that there was a desire for genuine collaboration, that's not in question. What is in question as to whether it actually occurred, whether there was time, whether the environment in the school and in the parish permitted that genuine collaboration between priests and the schools. When you read the report, you will see that this comes through constantly in many, many different ways. You've got to read beyond the notion that it occurred, and it definitely occurred, which means it's definitely occurring now. But whether the genuineness of it is there is another matter. Whether priests feel that they have time to engage with schools in a way which is meaningful for them, meaningful for the school, and meaningful for the kids that are in the schools is a point that we do need to reflect on. How important are schools in the daily lives of priests with the enormous number of things that they have to get through in a week? It's the one area in this research that hit my heart very, very heavily, and that I could see and hear the priests when I interviewed them. They were wrestling with this. It was a dilemma, particularly given the context that exists right now in our society. It was a huge dilemma. We all know that people do engage with a multitude of things in their lives. And when we're overloaded, we do tend to choose. We do tend to be drawn towards those areas that we encounter in our lives that are easiest, that we feel most familiar with, that we feel that we can actually do something about and it not invade us in a negative way. Those areas that we encounter in our lives where we do feel as if, oh, I've got to give a little bit extra here. This could be not as nice as I would like it to be. This will be more challenging than perhaps I would like it to be. It's going to take up a lot more of my time than what I think I've got. We do tend to shy away from those areas, and yet they're the areas that we need to give ourselves to. So this was expected, but it's one that we really do need to think about just a little bit more. The demands of religious leadership. I'm going to be very quick about this one and simply say that there is a hierarchy that exists in the school, and the principal is the religious leader within the school context. That's the way that it appears in all the documentations. The reality on the ground was that principals, RECs and priests, for that matter, in many instances didn't think that that was the case. In fact, and students in particular ascribed religious leadership to the REC. So this is an area that does need to be thought through. Principles are supposed to be, according to the documentation, the religious leaders. The perception is that it's RECs. It's an area that we do need to look at and act on. I'm conscious of the time, so I'll move on from that. Additional work will need to be accurately assessed. Additional work will be needed to accurately assess what is meant by the term religious literacy and how it manifests in the student population. I'm not going to read through the rest of that recommendation because I'm going to address the heart of it. And that is, there's a diverse view about what is meant by religious literacy. It's kind of on a continuum. At one end of the continuum, religious literacy is meant or is taken to mean literally what is read, what is in the gospel, what is in the textbooks, the information that comes to us directly. On the other end of the continuum, it's an understanding of that. The notion, what does it all mean in the context of our culture? What does it all mean in the context of the school environment? So religious literacy is very, very much a diverse concept as it exists in schools. My own personal view is that religious literacy is not about just what's in the gospel. It's understanding that. It's taking what's in the gospel, knowing it's a given. We don't concentrate on that at all. It's a given. Where we concentrate is taking that, understanding what it means for us in our lives and taking it into our lives. And that's the area that perhaps is lacking. So when I look at this notion of religious literacy, it was expected that it would come through and be important. But the form in which or how religious literacy manifests is the difficult part that we need to engage with. It's not superficial, it's deep, it's meaningful, it's about absolute understandings. And we do need to think about that a bit more. Another finding that was not expected was that sharing our story does not adequately embody the sacraments emphasised by recent popes. Solutions should be investigated which offer a religious education curriculum that proceeds from the foundation of sacramental liturgical mystagogy. Apart from the big words that are in there, what it really means is that sharing our story, if we connect that with the previous point that I was making, does need some attention. It's not saying that it's all wrong or anything like that, but where it seems to be lacking, where it seems to be not fulfilling the needs of those that are implementing the program, is in terms of having our kids take the messages that we're intending them to take into themselves, into their lives, and for it to manifest in how they live out their Catholic identity. That's the part that needs the attention. That seems to be the part where sharing our story is perhaps not meeting expectations. The next one also follows on from that, and that is sharing our story does not appear to have been particularly successful in helping students to develop their own ongoing commitment to the Catholic faith. Careful consideration needs to be given to ways which enhance religious literacy, personal commitment, and meaningful participation in the Eucharist. Kids do participate in services at school. Sometimes kids in great numbers are marched down to the local church where they participate in services. And they talk about this in the material that they provided to us as data. But the reality is, when the kids are asked about the meanings of the what's the word that I'm looking for? The meanings of what they participate in. It's not always clear to them. It's not always clear to them as to what it actually means for them in their lives and how they should live their lives. These are the important things that should come through in any religious education curriculum. And it was clearly demonstrated that perhaps the extent and the depth of understanding that the curriculum that we have at present may not have been provided. There are 2 points here that need to be made. What was expected but different to practice? So this was expected, the findings here were expected, but the practice associated with those findings may not necessarily be what we would like. Religious education needs to be seen to be a priority in the Catholic community at every level. Parish, schools, family, systemic authorities. Structures and support need to be in place commensurate with this belief. In other words, it's a whole package. It did come through and it did meet expectations, but the connection across those expectations, when you read the whole report, is not what we would hope it would be. And this is a bit of a sad thing to say, and I'm not going to mince words, but there was a disconnect between the schools and the parish. Sure, priests went into schools. The kids from the schools went into the parish and participated in all the things that were expected of them. But that genuine connection and integration that we looked for was not there. It was not there. There was a disconnect. Priests, particularly those that I interviewed, and they're in this room right now, and some of them will remember saying that when they went into schools, they went into schools because it was an expectation. They wanted to go. It was expected of them. But when they got there, they were a little bit at sea. Sure, they'd go to morning tea. They'd have meetings with the principals and the RECs, and that would be all fine. Some of them, when they moved around the schools and engaged with staff and with students, that was all fine too. But that was only a few. The majority of them felt ill at ease. They were able to extract their feelings of unease from some of the issues that we're grappling with in our society at present, and look deeply into their commitment and interactions with schools. And they did say they weren't what they should be. They didn't meet their own expectations. We need to look at why this is the case. Are priests too busy? Are there too many other things? What is the priority of schools in that connection between church, parish and school? From my perspective, given the fact that priests do lead a very demanding and busy life, surely all of us see that the time that our religious leaders, our community religious leaders spend in our schools just can't be underestimated. Schools have got to be the focus for how we engage with the next generation. There is no more efficient or potentially more effective way of doing that other than to have a clear way that makes it very easy for our priests to engage with us in our schools. And if that's not happening, And if we have to turn the system on its head to ensure that it happens, well, from my perspective, that's what we do. That is what we do. It's important. It's the most important thing. And the last point that is worth mentioning, and I'm being removed now,
Nicely.
is the pedagogical practices. And I've already spoken a bit about that, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.